Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. We are getting towards the end of the season, or the kind of the spring part of the season anyway, the last third or last quarter of the season. And so traditionally that means exam season, whether it's level 3 exams or level 4 exams. Our level 4 exams happen pretty much exclusively at the end of the season, except for our one mid-season exam, and level 3 exams are also really busy. So thanks for tuning in on this little presentation. This is going to be a 3-part presentation that deals mainly with the level 4 exams. Just the process, some things to think about. I know many of you are kind of in the midst of training or prep for those. Actually, our first spring exam starts next week at Tremblant, so good to see an exam running out there. So my aim here with these 3 little presentations is going to be to run through maybe some of the common things that we see at the exam, level 4 exam, whether it's on the writing, the teaching, or the pedagogy / instructor training component. And I'm going to break this up into 3 parts based on components. So I'm going to start today by talking about the level 4 writing component and some of the things that you can expect when you come to the writing exam, and some of the things that we look for, maybe some common pitfalls, common sources of feedback as well that we see at the writing exam at the level 4. And just in general, some things for you to think about as you go into that exam, so that there's fewer surprises and hopefully no surprises. That's the ideal situation. So what I've got up here that I'm sharing with you right now is just the level 4 course guide. And I just added some text on here as well regarding the online courses. So if you took the level 4 course portion either last year or this year, you've probably gone through this, but I'm sharing these links with you now, and I would really strongly recommend that you go through the level 4 online course. These links will take you to a non-marked version of the level 4 online course, online workshop. And it just covers a lot of some of the info that we're going to go through today. It covers some of the presentation material for mainly the teaching and the pedagogy portions as well. So worthwhile going through that stuff because it's updated every season prior to the presentation of the course. And it's available in both languages, in English and French. So if you can, jot down those links or take a quick screenshot there, and I'll post these links in the comments as well below, and or in the description below the video. But again, really strongly recommend that if you haven't yet, please go through that online course before you come to the exams this year. It's worth your time. So just scanning through the course guide here, I just want to cover some of the basics about the agenda of the level 4 exam, and then we'll jump into the specifics of the writing component itself. So I'm going to go down here to page 5 and just quickly talk really briefly about the exam agenda. So in general, the way that we run the exam agenda is we do the technical or the writing component of the exam on day 1 and the first half of day 2. So as you know, or I'm hopefully aware, you've got 6 tasks that you're required to complete on the level 4 writing component. And so the way that we spread those tasks out over the day and a half really depends on a lot of different factors, but terrain availability, snow conditions, weather, crowds, busyness at the resort requests, all that sort of stuff. So there's no guarantee that we will do, for example, the corridor task on the first morning as the first task. It really just depends on how the situation plays out and how we're able to access terrain. But in general, the first day and a half will be the writing exam. And then once the writing exams are done around midday on day 2, then we get into the teaching or instructor training. But generally, the second afternoon of the exam is teaching evaluations. And I'm going to talk about the teaching component in a separate presentation here as well that you'll see a link to. So we won't get too much into the details of those. And then we progress through the afternoon of day 2 into the morning of day 3. And then as we get through everybody's teaching evaluations, then we get into the instructor training or the pedagogy evaluations. And so that takes us through the 4 days. So the level 4 exam, unless we have an exceptionally small group, the level 4 exam is generally 4 days. And I say that because, for example, next week we have a small group. And so we've reduced the duration of the exam to 3 days because we just don't need all the time to get through everybody. But in general, it's a 4-day exam. If you're coming for a retest, generally we're done, we hold 2 sets of results. So the first set of results will be for the riding only component people, and that would be at the end of day 2. And anybody else who's complete at that time. So if you're just coming for, say, riding and teaching, or just teaching, then you're probably going to be done by the end of day 2. And we do hold results announcement for any successes there at the end of day 2. And then the second set of results is done at the end of day 4, when the exams finish, when everybody's finished the exams. So just so you can plan accordingly, and if you want to be there for your results to meet with your evaluators, day 2 and day 4, end of day 2 and end of day 4 are the 2 points when you'll be jumping in on that. So as you know, we've got 3 parts in the evaluation on the level 4. There's a teaching component, a technical or riding component, and instructor training or pedagogy component of the course. And you're required to pass each of those 3 to be certified as a level 4. As well, you may or may not know that with each component, once you pass it, you keep it for life. So you're not required to retest it after a certain time. Once you pass that component, you keep it. There is no time limit associated with the level 4 certifications, so you can take as long as you need to finish off all the components. There's no requirement that you resit the course, although it's always strongly recommended if it's been a few years since you sat in on the course. The content does change a little bit, and our presentation improves from year to year. And you might pick up some finer details that will help you to complete the certification if you do redo the course, but that's not a mandatory. So as I said, we're going to talk today about the teaching component, sorry, the riding component, the technical component. So the technical evaluation is done through a series of tasks or maneuvers, as it says here under part A. And we've got 6 tasks or 6 maneuvers: the corridor, the expert short radius turns, the newly named or new for this year medium radius sliding turns, previously known as the intermediate sliding turn, but we'll talk about the reasons for that change in a few minutes here. Free run in bumpy terrain or moguls, expert terrain, freestyle skills in the park, and then large radius turns, sometimes known as the carve turns, but large radius turns, and we'll talk about the reasons for that as well. So the general flow of the riding evaluation is each candidate will have 2 opportunities to do each task, and you will have each run is marked by 2 markers. So each task has 2 markers, 2 evaluators, and each evaluator assigns a number mark out of 10, with 6 out of 10 being the minimum required to pass. So it does outline it in the online course there, but at the end of your 2 runs, you'll have 4 total marks. Those 4 numbers out of 10 get averaged out, and the average needs to equal a 6 or better in order for you to pass that task. The other aspect to think about here with the riding evaluation is you do need to pass all 6 tasks at the same exam. So we don't give credit for tasks that are passed previously. You do need to achieve a 6 or better on each task in order to get credit for the riding component on the level 4. And then just if you're following along here on the course guide, we've just got some general descriptions of what each of the tasks are, and we're going to get into them with a little bit more detail shortly. And I'm just going to continue to scroll down here through the course guide to page 8 in the course guide, where we have a little bit more detail regarding the riding assessment and the expert level riding skills that we're looking for at this level. So just some general notes at the top of the table here, or the top of the chart. So rides consistently on expert terrain at appropriate speeds. So appropriate speeds there is the big key. Each of the tasks that we'll see in a few minutes here in some of the videos that I have to show, each of them has an appropriate speed. So, it's possible to ride too fast and not show the performance. It's possible to ride too slow and not show the performance. But in general, each one has an appropriate speed. Part of the evaluation on the riding exam is to show that you can ride at the speed, I sort of think of it as a speed window that will show the most appropriate performance for that task. The second part displays mastery of the 3 core competencies in varied expert terrain. So the 3 core competencies centered in mobile position, turning the board with the lower body, and balance along the working edge. We're looking, at the very minimum, we're looking for you to show refinement and mastery of those things in your riding. The task-based riding evaluation has been designed to show versatility across different situations. And it's been designed to show, to allow you to show your ability to be able to use these 3 outcomes in your snowboarding. And then on top of those 3 core competencies, we also layer on top the advanced riding competencies of strength and flow, arc to arc, loading and deflection, and steering versatility. And I would say that those 4 advanced competencies really form kind of the foundation or the fundamental, along with the core competencies, but those 7 aspects really form the foundational sort of aspect of the riding evaluation at the level 4. And those are the kind of the guiding sort of principles with each of the tasks. Some of them are heavier more towards the core competencies, some of them are heavier more towards the advanced competencies, but in general, those are the outcomes that the evaluators are marking against and looking towards. And then the final point here just refers to your technical or instructor training sessions, but adjust the skills to provide technically sound demos that are easy to copy or copyable by an expert student or an advanced instructor. So when we teach on the level 4 in our teaching assessment, we're teaching expert students. So the demonstrations should be catered toward expert students. And then when we're running our instructor training session, it's catered towards advanced or experienced instructors. So that's where the demonstrations come into play. So let's look quickly. I'm just going to shift gears and go over to the online course. And lesson 5 in the online course, and it focuses in on these riding tasks so that we can get a little bit more specific. Each of them is broken down in the online course here with some video. And pulls some of the info from the course guide, and some of it is extra or supplemental to the course guide. So let's look at the corridor. So the first task that's listed here is the corridor. Candidates will be required to complete a series of turns at the expert performance level while staying within an 8-meter corridor. So that 8-meter corridor is intentionally chosen as it's a bit of I always call it a bit of a weird size turn. It's not a short radius turn. It's not a large radius turn. It's not a carved turn. It's right in the middle. It's sort of that awkward size in the middle. And the reason for that is it really showcases your ability to use pressure and steering to turn the board within that sort of odd size of size of turn. So the turn size, 8-meter corridor, and it's set with brushes to form the corridor. One thing that's important to note as you go into the corridor is it's not required that you turn around the brushes. Similar to a slalom course, the brushes just form the outer boundaries of the corridor. Speed window. So we talked a minute ago about the speed window. For this one, I would call it moderate and advanced speed. So moderate in that you need to be going fast enough in the corridor that you can see, we can get the board bending. We see some pressure and some deflection from one side of the corridor to the other. But if we go too fast in the corridor, we lose turn shape and we lose performance. On the other end of the speed sort of spectrum there is if we go too slowly, then we don't get the board bending, we don't get those advanced competencies happening. So there's no loading, there's very little arc to arc. So we need to find that sweet spot in the middle with speed where you're going fast enough to show performance, but not too fast. One little tip that I'll give you for the corridor is to watch the demo, and each of these tasks will be demoed by at least one evaluator on the exam, and count the number of turns from top to bottom in the corridor. And that can be a useful sort of tool for you to use when you're riding the corridor, is to be roughly, within a similar number of turns. So if the evaluator does say 14 turns in the corridor and you're doing 8 turns or 9 turns, chances are you're riding too fast and you don't have enough steering and turn shape. If the evaluation showed 14 turns and you've done 21 turns, then probably I would guess your speed is much too low and your turn size is much too close. So just kind of a tip that you can use, and you can use that if you're training in the corridor as well, is look at sort of optimal number of turns. Terrain that we use for the corridor is that dark blue or black. and we would generally choose groomed terrain unless something really weird happens on the morning of the corridor, but we would look for groomed terrain. I say dark blue or black because it is really location dependent, but we're looking for that upper intermediate, lower and advanced terrain for this task. And the turn type is a sliding, steered turn, or carved, I guess, if you have a snowboard with an exceptionally tight side cut. Generally not so much carved, but as needed. That's the key there with that second part, as needed. So just some notes here. Some of them I've mentioned. The objective of the corridor task is to show advanced competency outcomes. Riders should be traveling at a speed that allows for adequate loading and bending of the board. And the one thing that we look for in this task is we look for that acceleration across from one side of the corridor to the other. So riders traveling too fast will be unable to complete turns, resulting in lower board performance levels. Steering versatility is a big one, and it's evident in your ability to adjust the use of edge and pressure and adjust the shape of the turn so that you can maintain those advanced competency outcomes. So we do have a clip here of level 4 evaluator Adam Gardner in a corridor. And the one thing to look for here is, if I was to be marking this task, would be the first thing we look for is the rider using the full width of the corridor? So commonly what happens is, especially on the toe side, because you can't see behind you so well, often we see candidates kind of cut off that right-hand side of the corridor by a meter or a meter and a half. And then if you do the same on the other side, then all of a sudden the corridor is down to about a 5 or 6 meter corridor, and it's just a short radius turn. So one thing we look for is use of the full width of the corridor in this task. And then the other thing that we look for, that I mentioned earlier, is we look for that little bit of acceleration from the outside of the turn, the apex of the turn, across the mid part of the corridor and across to the other side. One tip that I always give on this task is to start these turns with a good amount of patience. So the turn should start with an edging movement, similar to the way that you would start a carved turn. And then from there, there's some refinement in the movements, the steering movements, to adjust the edge angle and the amount of steering angle and pivot that's being used. But often if we start these turns in the corridor with a heavy pivot movement or a heavy rotational movement, we just don't generate the pressure and the loading that we need to see in this one. So start with a lateral move, set up a platform and the edge, aim for sort of the midpoint of the corridor as you're transitioning from edge to edge, and then adjust by sort of fine tuning and feeling the ankles as you go through. So those are some common sources of difficulty in the corridor task. The second one is the expert short radius, or just the short radius turns. So the description, candidates will demonstrate a series of small radius or short radius turns on an expert slope. So the turn size here would be definitely smaller from the corridor. I would say more like the 5 meter. The speed would be, again, moderate to advanced. I would say the speed on this one would be similar to the corridor, maybe a touch faster, depending on the terrain. The terrain will definitely be a little steeper for this task than the corridor. So we're looking at black terrain that's groomed, possibly a double black run if the conditions are favorable. But we're looking at advanced or expert terrain for this one. And this is definitely a sliding or a steered turn. So good combination of edging and pressure and steering skills and pivot skills, to get this turn shape to happen. So just some notes on this one as well. The objective of this task is to show the rider's ability to maintain a short radius turn shape in steep terrain, and also show those advanced competency outcomes. Riders should be able to display excellent use of the 3 skills of pivot, edge, and pressure, blending each as needed based on terrain and speed. And speed management is evident through the rider's ability to dynamically adjust the turn shape and size to either accelerate or decelerate. And the final paragraph here, common faults include excessive use of upper body rotation, so particularly on the heel side turns, and we'll talk about that in a second. Riders traveling either too fast or too slow, so there's that speed window again, and not displaying a round turn shape is probably the last big one there. So as far as looking at the mechanics here of this task, we're definitely looking for that ability to steer through a completed turn. Often candidates on this task sort of mistake it as being an extremely small, like a 3 to 4 meter corridor. at those sizes, it's really difficult to show steering skills, and it becomes really difficult to adjust speed as well. So speed control has to happen through turn shape and not through interruptions to flow. So if we get going too fast, I always sort of think if I'm doing this task and I get going too quick, it turns into a bit of just kind of a wiggle or like an edge wiggle from heel side to toe side. And I lose that ability to steer and get that snow spray happening through the entire arc. And then the only way to deal with that is to sort of slam on the brakes and slow down really quickly and then restart. So it's a short radius turn, but it's not so short that you can't steer through it. So that's a big one. The other one that is highlighted in the notes above there in this course is that excessive use of upper body rotation, particularly on the heel side. And so when we open up that that upper body too far on the heel side, then what it does is it does a couple things. It drags our body weight forward over to the front foot, and we maybe get a little bit of back foot chatter. But the other thing is it creates a need to kind of throw the tail around to the toe side, and then it just interrupts the timing. So there's a little bit of separation between upper body and lower body is definitely required at this task. It's a lower body driven turn. The upper body really creates the stability. And so a little bit of separation is good, but if we start to get into the realm of sort of like counter rotation on every turn in order to make that short radius or that quick change, then that's where the big faults lie. So you should be passing through sort of towards the end of each turn, you should be passing through that neutral phase where you're back to hips basically kind of being neutral based on your stance. So go right back to the basics, and as we pass through the edge change, your hips should basically line up with the angle of your front foot. And that's always a good gauge or a good test. A bit of a freeze frame at each of the edge changes will help out with that one. All right, this is always a big one. Big source of question is the medium radius sliding turns. I mentioned earlier that this was formerly known as the intermediate sliding turn, but we ran into some issues with kind of perception around the task. So the name change, medium radius sliding turn, think of this one as a medium-sized turn done at a medium speed. So candidates will be asked to demonstrate a series of medium-sized sliding turns performed both forward and switch, so in both directions, on expert slopes at medium speeds or intermediate speeds. So the turn size is much larger. We're talking sort of 10 to 12 meters as the corridor size. And the speeds are lower, so it's an intermediate speed or a medium speed. The terrain, though, will be advanced or expert. So the terrain you can expect for this task will be the same as the terrain that you're asked to do the short radius, the previous task on. That's really, this task is meant to allow you to showcase your ability to apply the core riding competencies of being centered and mobile, turning with the lower body, and then balancing along the working edge. And then the turn type, definitely a sliding or steered turn. So some of the notes here, the objective of this medium-sized or medium radius sliding turn is to demonstrate the expert application of the core competencies in expert terrain. And it says here the same terrain as the expert short radius turns. Riders are asked to demonstrate a medium-sized turn at intermediate or medium speeds. The core competency outcomes become more difficult to demonstrate due to the steep terrain. So the terrain choice on this task is intentional. And your ability to apply the core competencies in expert terrain really is the sort of the gist of this task here. Speed management is evident through the rider's ability to complete the turns using a combination of edge, pivot, and pressure. And turns should be linked together fluidly without a pause, and the transition from forward to switch should happen with ease. So a few common faults with this one, or things to think about as you're training for this task or tackling this one. Again, excessive upper body rotation. If we're turning with the lower body, then any sort of upper body swinging or upper body rotation really is unnecessary. And in steep terrain on a medium-sized turn like this, it just pulls you out of position, and it really eats up time that you don't really have to do some of the steering movements with your lower body. Common faults include excessive use of upper body rotation and inadequate steering movements, resulting in the turn shape not being round, particularly above the fall line. So often we'll see an excessive move to the front foot combined with lots of upper body rotation. And what that does is it creates that kind of windshield wiper sort of action with the snowboard, where if you just think of the outcome, the snow spray, much of the snow spray would be spraying down the hill at that point. Your goal with this task, or my goal when I do this task, when I am demonstrating this task, is always to try to achieve a turn shape where there's a little bit of snow spray happening from the top of the arc to the bottom of the arc. And so that's that application of pressure. And if you're able to do that, chances are the turns will be round. And then the last part here with common faults, it says riders should show a mastery of the application of edging or edges, as well as pressure movements to maintain their path of travel in steep terrain. So what you want to avoid in this task is sort of becoming falling at the mercy of gravity a little bit and getting pulled excessively down the fall line. So this is we talk about the core competencies. We talk about this as being a medium-sized turn at a medium speed, and probably the whole reason why we've changed the name from the intermediate sliding turn is it's not an intermediate maneuver. And so one of the common things that traps that we found people falling into in previous years before we made the changes, don't think of this turn as a detuned turn. Don't think of it as a lower skill level turn. It just happens to be happening at a slower speed and a larger size, but it's still an advanced and expert maneuver. So one of the things that really helps me with this medium-sized turn is to approach it with some of the same body positions that I would for a short turn, but at a lower speed, obviously, and a bigger turn shape, larger turn shape. And then the last part here says it may be helpful to simply think of these turns more as medium-sized turns at a medium speed. Often the term intermediate implies that riders need to detune their skills somehow, which is not the case. So just a couple things in this one, and there is a note below this video that this terrain definitely is a little bit on the more on the blue side. You'll notice the track in the snow though. So we're looking for that kind of medium track in the snow, definitely sort of a crescent moon shaped track in the snow where it's widest at the apex of the turn and then gets narrow near the bottom. So that would be part of that pressure and steering ability to show that you're steering through the entire turn. And then the other thing to note here when you're doing this one is that the turns or the arcs should be linked. So we'll often see the turns end up being kind of a one turn that happens very quickly with a quick pivot, followed by a long traverse, and then a short turn followed by a long traverse. Think of it more like one arc or one turn blending straight into the next one. So once one turn is done and you've got the direction change that you're looking for, immediately start the next turn. So that it's truly a medium-sized turn and that we can really get a sense of your ability to steer through that entire arc. And then those core competencies, so especially that one of turning excessively with the upper body. This is a refined maneuver that really requires you to steer with the parts of the body that are closest to the snowboard and closest to the snow. The upper body is there to create stability, counterbalance as needed, all of those things, but really it's that lower body that's getting the work done in this task. And then the other thing with this task that I would say is if you've got the time, you really need to practice it. We don't do, unless you teach a whole lot of maybe level 1 or level 2 courses, we don't do this task often enough, I would say. And so get out there and practice this one and start to feel some of those things. And it shouldn't feel like a low-end maneuver. It should feel like you're using your skills and to make this maneuver happen. All right, the next one is the free run in expert terrain, and in brackets it says moguls because that's generally the expert terrain that we end up choosing more for objectivity on the exam. So candidates will perform a free run in varied black diamond freeride terrain and in brackets moguls or bumps. So the turn size, 6 to 8 meter corridor. This one, I mean, in real world terms, this task, I always think of it as it's similar to the short turns, the expert short radius turns, with the addition of some obstacles. So that's the varied terrain, but similar turn size, just also recognizing that often in bumpy terrain or varied terrain like that, we need a slightly bigger corridor. But it's basically similar in similar size to those short turns. Speed would be moderate and advanced again, and that would be dependent on terrain and what's in your way, basically how big those obstacles are that are in your way. And then the terrain is black or double black, and definitely ungroomed terrain or free ride terrain. And again, moguls in brackets there. And then the turn type, again, sliding turn. So the notes here, the objective of the free run in expert terrain is to demonstrate expert application of advanced riding competencies in varied terrain. Riders should be traveling at a speed that allows for loading of the board, creating acceleration across between turns, and uses terrain features to amplify performance. And that's a big one that you could translate over to being a kind of a common fault that we see in this task, is that not using the terrain to amplify performance. Line selection is an important aspect of this task, so riders should intentionally look for opportunities to show performance-related outcomes. Rebound, release, absorption, steering, loading, deflection, arc to arc, all of those things. You can use the terrain to help with that. And I would say that it's also important not to misinterpret that line as being using individual terrain features to show kind of one-offs. So we're not looking for you to sort of pick your way down the bumps and find the ones that are good to throw a 360, or you know, sort of, we're looking at the run as a whole from top to bottom. So you know, if it's you know, if the turns in between features are not up to standard, but the maneuvers on certain bumps or features are pretty complicated or pretty tricky, that's probably not going to achieve a passing mark. We're looking for the riding to be at the standard from the top of the run to the bottom of the run. And then the next part is speed management is evident throughout the rider's ability to dynamically adjust turn size and shape to accelerate and decelerate in relation to the terrain obstacle that might arise. So using terrain to help with speed management is big, especially in the bumps. So looking at sort of the backside or the uphill side of some of those bumps, some of the berms and some of the sort of natural shapes that the terrain creates can really help you adjust your speed. Again, like the short radius turns with speed in this task, I would say that it's definitely possible to go too fast. And that's always evident when you're just hanging on, and we've all felt that in the bumps. So if we get going a little too quick, turn shape and steering basically stops. So speed when it gets going too fast, and then on the slow end, if we go too slow on the speed side, our loading, our performance, our deflection through the turns, that stops as well. And we end up just kind of, you know, sort of like meandering through the bumps. So common faults include inadequate line choice, either too challenging or not challenging enough. So the example here is kind of shopping for optimal places to turn. So moving across the terrain and finding kind of the easy spots to turn and then moving back across the run. That's a common one here. And then the other one would be inability to display the key outcomes or the advanced competencies when there's terrain variability there. So look at the terrain and find the places to create things like loading and arc to arc and steering versatility. We're not looking in this task, we're not looking for it necessarily to be just a top to bottom super symmetrical set of short radius turns through this terrain. So there is sort of that element where you can move around through the terrain to sort of show your ability to add that versatility in your riding. But too much kind of moving around in the terrain really interrupts flow and can sort of kill your speed and your performance. So the big thing here, like I said, we're looking at this run being a top to bottom run, and we're marking it against you know, your ability to show those advanced competencies. We're not looking for just sort of the one-off. So if you end up in the air, that's great. Just make sure that you can recover from it and continue on through your run. If you want to throw in maneuvers like a spin or a 360, again, that's great, but just be really confident in your ability to pull that off and continue to just have it be a positive impact on your overall run. And so, you know, just picking your way through the bumps and throwing a 360 or a spin is not going to create a meets or an above standard mark on this task. And then from there, the mechanics of this one, it's really, like I said, it's really very similar to those short radius turns, with the addition of some obstacles thrown in to interrupt your flow. So it really showcases your steering versatility and your ability to look ahead and choose an effective line and lean on the terrain to create some performance. All right, the freestyle skills or the park task. So candidates will demonstrate refined freestyle skills in small and medium park features. So the turn size not applicable on this one, the speeds again, moderate, I would say. We're talking on, you know, the smaller end of the spectrum for park features. So your ability to match your speed to the feature would be really big on this one. Occasionally we'll use some large features, but in general, a small and medium. Again, it really depends on the location and the features that are available in the park at the time. And then the turn type obviously will be varied. So the objective of this task is to demonstrate your comfort and refinement with fundamental intermediate level freestyle skills and park features in the small to medium range. So some of the things that we're looking for here: mobility, balance, and control on box and rail features. And I would also say on jumps as well, is demonstrated through the use of varied tricks, including board slides, rotations, and presses. Demonstration of comfort with getting air is evident through the use of effective pop or ollie movements at takeoff, adequate absorption skills on landing, and the ability to show a variety of grabs. So as you can see from those two sort of paragraphs there, what we're looking for here is variation, creative variation, and at the very least refinement. So the features and the park usage that we're sort of using in this task is intentionally kept small to that medium range. But with that comes the requirement that we're looking for you to definitely be refined and comfortable enough to show some variation to your skills there. And then the third part here with rotational control, it says rotational control is showcased through the ability to demonstrate consistent tricks that involve rotations. So consistent tricks that involves rotations is the big one there, such as 180s in the air, on medium features, 360s on smaller features, or through rotational movements on box and rail features. Rotation should be created using the core of the body, controlled with the extremities, and stopped on landing using edge and pressure control skills. So you can think of this task really as a demonstration level task. And kind of the wording that I really like that we've incorporated at the Park 2 course is that idea that they're confidence inspiring demos. So when you do these demos, it looks like you are in control and your movements are refined and your skills are consolidated to the level that they're repeatable. And then there's a note here. So candidates are encouraged to think of this task in the sense of refinement and create a variation level fundamental freestyle skills in small and medium park features, as opposed to initiation or acquisition level skills in larger features. So that's sort of the key with this one. So we have the level 3 or the former level 3 park standard, which is now the Park 1 instructor course. Think of it like the Park 1 or the level 3 park standard plus. So it's like adding that element of refinement and variation to the Park 1 standard. And then the second part here, when we get to the video, it says that the Park Instructor 2 riding level can be considered a general equivalent. So the Park Instructor 2 is a new course for us this year. Many of you would have been on it. Some of you have it previously. You can think of it as a great training course for the level 4 for sure. But the riding standard at the Park 2 is very similar to the riding standard for this task that we're looking for. And so things like rotations or 360s in a couple different directions, definitely comfort with 180s in all directions, and then showing some variation on the direction of the spins. And then as well, having some variability and some variety in the tricks that you're comfortable with and the features that you're comfortable with. So often with this park task or this freestyle task is, it's not all about the trick or the maneuver that you're able to do on the feature. It's showing that you're comfortable across a variety of features and comfortable with that approach, setting the correct edge, for example, maintaining balance, maintaining mobility across a feature, and then coming off with control. And then doing it with some variability in your skills. So showing some variation in your kind of your bag of tricks in that one. So I'm not going to go through this video. This is the Park Instructor 2 standards video, and it's available at our YouTube channel for you to check out. And then finally, the large radius turns, also known, like I said before, as the carved turns, back to the groomed terrain. So candidates will be asked to demonstrate refined advanced carving performance on groomed terrain. So much larger turn size, 12 to 15 meters plus. It really depends on terrain, I guess, and snow conditions. The speeds would be higher, so higher speeds, advanced or even expert speeds, I'd say. And then again, for terrain here, a little bit resort dependent, but blue, darker blue to the odd black run if the conditions are really favorable. And the turn type that we're ideally looking for is a carved turn. So, you know, the carved turn As we know, really the hallmark there is it has a lack of any sort of rotation, any sort of pivot movement in the snowboard. So the tail of the board follows the nose of the board. The reason we call it a large radius turn and not a carved turn is that in the event that the conditions maybe aren't perfect or aren't all that favorable, then we can look at the mechanics. Maybe if it's a really hard packed or icy day and you may get getting a little bit of steering angle, it's a little bit more of a sliding turn, but the mechanics should be there so that if the snow was great snow, that the sliding turn would turn into a carved turn, if that makes sense. So the objective here is that demonstration of the ability to use side cut and edging to achieve the advanced competencies in a larger radius turn. Candidates should be demonstrating efficient carve turns that prioritize board performance. Speeds will be higher during this task, but speed control and management is important, so through turn shape and size. Riders traveling too slowly or quickly may not achieve the expert outcome. So this is a common theme that we see here through all these tasks, is that speed window. So riding too fast or too slowly will affect your performance outcome. The ability to maintain a carved path of travel is a key to this task, and riders should show a mastery of the application of edge at the start of the turn, moderation of edge angle during the turn, and the ability to carry momentum from one turn to the next. So some variation in turn size and shape is good in this one. We try to choose terrain that has some variation to it as far as fall lines and pitches. So being able to adjust turn size and shape is important in this one. And don't be afraid to mix that up a little bit. The turns don't need to be exactly the same size from the top of the run to the bottom. The one common fault that I would identify in this one, it happens when the terrain maybe gets a little bit mellower or a little bit on the flatter side, is your ability to tap into the loading of the board to maintain performance when the terrain maybe isn't quite as challenging. And so that often what happens in flatter terrain is it just becomes kind of put it on edge and wait for the turn to end, and then put it on the new edge and wait for the turn to end. So being able to push on the board, adjust the loading, adjust the bending in the snowboard to maintain performance, even when the terrain maybe isn't giving you that feedback. And then in steeper terrain, if the terrain is more on the challenging end of the spectrum, to be able to kind of attack it at higher speeds and really show that aggressive start of the turn with a smooth application of the edge to start, and then managing pressures throughout the middle of the turn. And then the rest of this online course just goes through a sample marking format, and we'll show you the sort of the marking format that would happen on the marking form. All right. One last thing, that's basically the overview of the riding tasks for this component, for the riding component. And then the only sort of the last note that I would offer there is that when you do come to the exams, you will get marks. You will get marks in the form of the number marks that your evaluators have assigned. The other thing that we started doing last year is we started marking the demo runs as well. So you will see what the demo marks or what the demo runs were marked at as well. So whoever's marking the task also marks the demos from the other evaluators. And then those numbers will be published with your notes so that you have a bit of a comparison between what you saw and how that mark compared to the mark that you got, whether it was better or worse or the same. And so that's done as a bit of an effort to get you more on the same page as far as what the outcomes that we're looking for are like. We have had some feedback with recent exams that the riding mark feedback maybe was lacking. And what I would offer is that if you come to the exams and you get these riding marks, the marks associated with each task are your feedback. So it's important to understand that the course portion of the level 4 is where the development happens and where you get the feedback from your evaluators and your fellow course candidates, and you take that feedback and you work on it. But when you come to the exam, it's an assessment. It's an assessment of your skills at the time. For example, at the Lake Louise exam in the spring, we'll have upwards of 20, maybe 25 people doing that. And it's not realistic to expect the evaluators to give you a development plan with your notes, with your feedback. For the most part, you'll get numbers, and you'll get some justification for why the numbers are what they are in terms of what was maybe limiting you from showing the standard. But what you won't get is an extensive feedback on how to achieve the standard, or what you should do next, or what your training plan should look like. It's just not possible at the exam. So it may sound a little bit harsh, but the feedback that you'll get on the riding component from the level 4 are the numbers associated with each task. And unfortunately, that's just how it is. It's an assessment, it's an exam, and the course portion is there for the development side of things. So some things to think about. So on the riding side, if you're training, hopefully that gives you some ideas to do some training. Get yourself out there and do these tasks. They've been designed so that they're practicable and that you can go out and train them and get some feedback on them. That's it for the riding component. Watch for part 2, where we'll tackle the other parts of the level 4 exam. Thanks, everybody.